Messieurs, dames, bonjour.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083, we're going to be examining the 2017-2018 Annual Report of the Commission of Official Languages, referred to the committee on Tuesday, June 12, 2018. So I'd like to welcome you to the Official Languages Committee. Perhaps you could introduce us to the people who are accompanying you this morning. Then you'll have a 10-minute presentation as usual, and then we'll turn to questions, answers, and comments. So, Commissioner, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. It's with a great sense of duty that I speak before you this morning. I'd like to point out that I'm accompanied by Pierre Leduc, Ghislaine Séclé, Pascal Giguère, who is General Counsel, and Mr. Eric Trepanier, who is Assistant Commissioner. As you know, I tabled my annual 2017-2018 report on June 12th. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the major themes of this report, as well as my mandate and priorities. I'd also like to talk to you about a few issues which I hope are all very important to us. The annual report discusses a number of interventions taken by the Office of the Commission of Official Language during fiscal year 2017-28. These were designed to encourage federal institutions to ensure that official languages has its rightful place. During the celebrations, for instance, the office worked to ensure that the federal institutions were aware of the importance of providing Canadians and the many visitors about the experiences reflecting the country's linguistic duality.
Also continued its discussions with federal institutions to identify compliance issues and to ensure that leadership leads to tangible and timely measures. However, some institutions are still struggling to comply with their language obligations. In 2017-2018, my office received a total of 894 admissible complaints, of which more than half were about services to the public. Clearly, there's still a great deal of work to be done with regard to respect for official languages. In my opinion, federal institutions do not have the tools to properly assess themselves, particularly in relation to communications with and services to the public. This undermines the rights of Canadians, including members of official language minority communities. The current tools used to measure federal institutions' performance in terms of official languages do not give an accurate picture of the situation, nor do they help federal institutions measure their actual progress in terms of the compliance with the Official Languages Act. C'est pourquoi
this is why I recommended to Canadian Heritage and the Treasury Board that they go ahead with an assessment of the current assessment tools and to change them where necessary. It's essential that we have a clear picture of the official language situation within the federal apparatus. During the consultations that we held with federal institutions in the fall of 2016 on our tools and activities, we learned that they wanted to be better supported with respect to official language procedures. The office is currently working towards developing a new tool, a mature model, which we hope to roll out in 2019. In addition to the tools, which are essential, we need leadership. The government has to show this leadership, both within the government and within the public service and at every level.
Annual report. I also focused on leadership in the federal public service and look at the clerk of the Privy Council's report on language of work. Given that the clerk of the Privy Council, as head of the federal public service, has made language of work a priority in the public service in his report, I recommended that the clerk establish an appropriate mechanism to ensure that, starting in September 2018, federal employees receive annual status updates on the work done by the committee responsible for implementing the recommendations contained in the report. As you know, Linguistic duality is one of Canada's core values. It's one of the cornerstones of our society's identity and diversity. But there are challenges, which in my office needs to remain vigilant and ensure that official languages continue to be a priority at the national level. Vous avez devant vous
You have before you a document summarizing my priorities as the Commissioner of Official Languages. I've also forwarded this report to my team. I'm happy to have the opportunity this morning to talk to you about the 3 priorities I will be focusing on over the next few years. First of all, I'm going to be urging federal institutions to break down the barriers that are preventing the objectives of the Official Languages Act from being met. And we'll be doing this through a better understanding of success factors. As I already said, leadership has to be demonstrated by the government and within the public service, and this at every level. I'm hoping to see measurable results and progress for Canadians, including the members of official language communities. A strong leadership will enable the institutions to ensure that their official language obligations are well understood at every level, and that they provide for appropriate planning, and that the results are monitored efficiently.
will be to work with the federal government and its institutions to ensure that they take the necessary measures to achieve the expected outcomes of the Action Plan for Official Languages 2018-2023, investing in our future. Federal institutions must stay attuned to the needs and concerns of official language minority communities, particularly in the areas of immigration, justice, and early childhood, to ensure that their actions and decisions come after careful consideration of the language rights of Canadians and the vitality of those communities. That's why I'll be keeping a close watch on the implementation of the 2018-2023 Action Plan. As I've said before, roles and responsibilities still need to be clarified and accountability measures need to be defined. Finalement, j'encourage
Finally, I would strongly encourage the government to truly modernize the Official Languages Act so that it reflects both the heritage and the future of official languages in Canada. Moreover, the office began its examination of the Act in the summer of 2017 and will be multiplying its efforts over the past few months in order to pursue the dialogue with various key stakeholders. In November 2017, the office also held a national conference in order to collect various perspectives in order to get a common vision of the future of linguistic diversity in a constantly evolving society.
My analysis on its modernization and then issue my official position. For now, however, I am of the opinion that the federal government, which has already committed to this project, must consider 3 principles when modernizing the Act: that the legislation must be relevant, dynamic, and strong. I encourage this committee to take the lead in modernizing the Act. Official languages need to stay on the agenda so that linguistic duality in Canada can continue to grow. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the official language of your choice, and I'll be happy to answer them. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you for your attention. I'm now ready to answer any questions you may have in the official language of your choice. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for your presentation. We'll begin. We have quite a bit of time this morning, but we'll get down to business right away. We'll begin this round with Mr. Alpuk. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Commissioner, and good morning to the people accompanying you. This is the first time that we have the Commissioner here to the committee, so thank you very much for coming. I think that the work that you do is twofold. You look at the theoretical aspects of the Act, you look at the workload that you have in your office and the relationships that you have here on the Hill and with the official language minority situation communities, but you have to also have to ensure that you keep hope going for the minority groups in Canada. And so you have a practical aspect and a theoretical aspect to your work. But when I hear about what you do, it seems to me that things are well underway. But here in the committee, we've heard, as a result of a meeting that was held this morning with young French Canadians, we were told that you told them to calm down a bit, to not have too many expectations, and to not ask the government to do too much with respect to the protection of language groups. So I'd like to give you this opportunity to explain this, because we were surprised to hear this. We were quite taken aback by what these young people were saying to us. So, as you mentioned, the commissioner has multiple roles. We have to protect and promote the language. We have to play an educational role as well. I remember meeting with young people and I talked about the importance of the complaint process, how important it was to file complaints, and that this was one way of advancing language rights. I believe we may have talked about modernization. I talked about a calendar or schedule, and I said ideally that the Act should be modernized as quickly as possible. But given the current context, it would be difficult, I believe, to have a new Act by 2019. So perhaps that's why I said that they have to have fewer expectations. I don't recall telling young people that they shouldn't expect much from the Official Languages Act. Thank you for your answer. And when you communicate with the government to talk about your ideas or whatever, who do you call? Usually, which department? Up to date, I've met with Minister Joly, Minister Duclos. But in your everyday life, who do you call first in the government? Do you have a go-to person? For example, the ethics commissioner is going to contact Scott Bryson, who's responsible for ensuring that all departments comply with Canadian law. Who do you call in the government who's responsible for official languages? Right now, that would be Mrs. Joly. I'm happy to know that. Now, there was a decree or an order given to Canadian Heritage, given to Ms. Joly, Minister Joly. Are you convinced that the government is doing an adequate job when it comes to official languages? When you talk about modernizing the Act, it's important. This is a whole issue of governance. Do we have the best governance structure? I would say no. We've not had a great governance structure over the past few years, but if we go back to 2003, we had a committee of ministers who were responsible for official languages. Then it was given turned over to the deputy ministers, then champions, and now it's ADMs. So this whole structural issue is on the table. Very well. In your sheet that you handed out to us, you listed 3 priorities. I was surprised to see that you have such, I'm glad to see you have such clear priorities. Modernizing the Official Languages Act, that's good, but when you referred to it earlier and you wanted a new law or act that was relevant, dynamic, and strong, those are good objectives, but what 3 priorities do you have with respect to the modernization? You referred to governance. That would be one. What are the others? When we try to tie principles with tangible things, when I say strong, I'm talking about governance. And we are also looking at mechanisms that will allow us to have compliance. Currently, with the Act, the Commissioner has a lot of investigative powers, but the Act is silent when it comes to follow-up on our recommendations. So that's one issue.
Also, it's very important when you talk about how the Act can evolve. Technology plays an important role in the delivery of communications. How can we come up with something that is technology neutral? And that's where the Act should go, in that direction. Right now, we have to look at Section 4, that will clarify the commitments in terms of services offered to the public. And there's the whole question of justice in French. This is also very important. Of course, we also need a regulatory framework around Section 7, which is not clear enough right now. So here are some examples of principles, but there are others as well. That's it for now for ALUPA. Now we go to René Arsenault. Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Commissioner, for this first meeting with our committee in your official role. I have a question in terms of one of your priorities, in the third one, rather. There are three. I imagine that your third priority here on the paper, well, the first is to urge the government to undertake a meaningful modernization of the OLA. So Part 7 of the Act, in terms of the Gascon decision, which hurt minority communities, how do you see, in terms of the modernization of the OLA, a conciliation between Part 7 in terms of the society, and how you can promote paragraphs 1 and 2, for example. They say we have to respect provincial jurisdiction at the same time. So how do you see all of this in terms of the modernization of the Act? When we talk about Part 7, one of the challenges is the lack of definition of this particular part. We're talking about positive actions that are supposed to be taken and to make sure that communities thrive. Right now, with the Gascon decision, this could be anything. There doesn't have to be a link even to a program, or with anything, for that matter. So this could be anything could be a positive action. It's rather problematic. So in terms of promotion, we're really thinking about it right now at the Commissioner's office. We don't necessarily have the resources to do promotion. There's also the protection and promotion aspects, and they require the same resources. But some federal institutions who do have the means to do promotion campaigns and awareness campaigns, well, for early childhood, for example, we talk about the importance of making parents aware that there are these services, and we have to offer services in the minority language. So this campaign did not happen. And when we talk about promoting linguistic duality, there are also other federal institutions that have the tools to do so. They can promote things. So this is how we could approach the ideal of having equal services in French and English in Canada, but we're quite far from that right now. So the word promotion involves education, awareness, and we need tools that we do not have right now. The constitutional question, well, we have to see how we can encourage these communities to thrive while respecting provincial jurisdiction. So how do you think that we could achieve this objective while respecting provincial jurisdiction? When we talk about discussions about FPT jurisdiction, well, sorry to interrupt you, but we're hearing a lot of things outside of Quebec in Francophone minority communities that the provinces are somewhat, well, they don't really do any efforts in terms of promotion. So that doesn't allow them to thrive. So that's why I'm going with my question. Yes, well, if we look at the situation right now, well, I remember when there were no services in French in any of the provinces outside of Quebec. We've made some progress, but quite often when we talk about agreements between provinces and the federal government or territories and the federal government, sometimes it's not clear what is supposed to be done in terms of linguistic clauses. So it's really important to promote linguistic duality in these clauses. Also, I think when we talk about linguistic duality, the Commissioner's mandate in terms of promoting it in Canada affects everyone. And I think it's important for the federal government to show some leadership in this respect. They have to make sure that when there are agreements with provinces and territories, that things are very clear. Linguistic clauses have to be very strong, rock solid, and we need an accountability mechanism that is transparent. Promotion, if I may. Well, if you look at the support that Canadians have in terms of official languages, we did a survey, and it says quite clearly that there's strong support for official languages. It's accepted. But when we move to another level, we have to make sure that it's more just accepting this support. It has to be alive. It has to thrive. Not only do Francophone communities outside of Quebec and Anglophone communities in Quebec have to understand this concept of duality, but all Canadians have to support it. Do I still have time left, Chair? No. That's it for now. Now we're going to move to Mr. Choquette. Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Commissioner, emotionally, what was your reaction in terms of the Gascon decision when you saw it? I was quite surprised. I was very disappointed. Disappointed is not even strong enough to describe what I felt when I saw it. I remember I was in the office. Legal counsel entered the room. They looked at me and they said, "It's not good news." And I said, "Do you have any good news?" And they said, "Not really." This ruling means that we can always have complaints and they can always be lodged. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of time, but I want to know what your immediate reaction was. And it's important because I have a letter here from the FCA and the two largest organizations. And they said that we learned last week that the Official Languages Committee changed his evaluation criteria for examining complaints. And the FCA asked us to act immediately to make sure that Part 7 of the OLA is maintained and that there's still measures, and there's even a guide for federal institutions under the OLA with Part 7 that has to be implemented. So if you, like all of us, you were shocked, well, I am one of the plaintiffs in Netflix. There's 4 of us. We received your report, and it says that we're sorry, we can't accept your complaint, and the conclusions said that this is not really important because Part 7 doesn't really mean anything anymore. So what I would expect from you is to say no. We have to contest this decision, and I know you're appealing it. We need something stronger. So how come you have changed your evaluation criteria without even consulting these organizations, the QCGM and FFCM? Well, it's simple. the law has changed. And now, according to this decision, what we can do in terms of investigations is limited. The toughest component of this decision is that we can't define whether a complaint is founded or not unless there's consequences of a particular policy. We have to know that there's a negative impact, and once this is established, then we can lodge a complaint. The Act says, well, the law says we have to respect different criteria. No, go ahead, finish. So I'm meeting Ms. Joly next week to talk about what follow-up can be done for Part 7. But now we have this decision, and this now is up to the government and the FFCB, BC rather. Well, the law has not changed, but the decision interprets it differently, but the law itself hasn't changed. It stains the 7, Part 7 is still there. It's still the same. What stakeholders are saying is, how come there are no regulations in terms of Part 7? If we had a directive from the department that could specify Part 7, we could avoid the situation we're in right now. You're right, and that is why the modernization of the Act, that's something we're going to include. No, that's long term. But can we ask Minister Joly when you meet her soon? Will you tell Ms. Joly we have a serious issue we need to solve right away? I have complaints about Netflix and I can't do anything. Can you tell her we have to amend the regulations, or we need some type of ministerial directive so I can do my job, so I can do my work? Well, yes. When I meet with her, I will bring up some key issues about this, and you're right. Right now, with the Gascon ruling, as you say, I have to do my job, particularly in terms of Part 7 of the Act, because Part 7 is the one that affects communities the most. And this part requires federal institutions to take positive measures to support the development of OLMCs. And right now, the definition of positive measures is unclear. And anything could be a positive measure. So right now, we're facing this new context, legal situation. Do I still have time left, Chair? Okay. Yes, you're right. As you explained so well in the Netflix complaint, anything could be a positive measure. The action plan is a positive measure. Investment in Radio-Canada is a positive measure. Even though this has nothing to do with Netflix, we all agree. So that's why we really have to review this. And I think it's your role when you meet with the minister, I'm not sure if it's this week or next week, and tell her we need a departmental directive. We need something urgently. And we're reviewing the regulations right now. And could we not add this aspect in terms of Part 7 in the next few weeks? Yes, it's interesting when you talk about the revision of Part 4 as well, which involves the Treasury Board. Part 7 involves Ms. Joly and the new department. But this only confirms the urgency of modernizing the OLA. Thank you very much, Mr. Choquette. Now we're going to Nova Scotia with Mr. Sanson. Thank you very much, Mr. Théberge, and your whole team for Ms. Callie, who's really done an excellent job on an interim basis. So, Mr. Théberge, as you can imagine, we're very happy to have you with us here today to shed more light on this, because this is the first meeting with you. Part 7 was mentioned by two of my colleagues, so I won't discuss that. But there are a few points I'd like to discuss. First, in terms of federal institutions, I liked the fact you mentioned this in your presentation because this is a problem, and we've been facing it for a few years. There's the whole question of evaluation. Who reports to who to make sure that the Act is respected within our institutions? Could you perhaps take a minute to talk about how we can make sure that this is successful? As I said earlier, I gave you some history of past approaches in this respect.
Durant nos consultations,
When we consulted people about the modernization of the Act, several stakeholders made suggestions about how we could ensure better governance. And they talk about a central organization. We're not sure which one it could be. Perhaps it would be the Privy Council, the Treasury Board, but we need some type of central organization. One organization, rather than spreading out the responsibilities among the various departments. Also, it is important for this to be communicated up to top officials. What's obvious is that if we have a deputy minister that doesn't encourage the implementation of the Act, well, it sends a message that everyone hears. That's very important. Thank you very much. I really liked that you talked about the past, the minister, the deputy minister, because the issue is still on the table. Second point that's very important for me is OLMCs, and this data is crucial, and research is crucial. So we don't see as much as research as we would like, and that's another point we should raise with the department. But what is your opinion on the census? The questions in the census don't always properly address rights holders. There's 23(1) and 2A. What have you looked at this? Top officials met with our committee, and they made some commitments in terms of these new questions in the census. But what is clear is that the future of OLMCs involves education. Everything involves education. Identifying rights holders is crucial for the Francophone system to thrive and survive. Very good. Because you're saying it's essential to get the right questions about the rights holders. So thank you so much. I don't have much time left. You also have to discuss another topic which is very important. It's about FPT agreements. This is essential. And you mentioned early childhood. So I'd like you to delve into this a bit, because this is the first time, if I understand correctly, within a FPT agreement where we've inserted a linguistic clause. Some people say it's not strong enough, but that's another question for another day. But in your opinion, should every department not have in their agreement, every FPT agreement should not have such a linguistic clause? And how could we insert it everywhere to make sure that, well, if I have a portfolio, I should be able to influence the result of it? I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Well, my opinion is quite clear on this. We do need linguistic clauses in every FPT agreement. This is part of the principle of transparency and accountability. Thank you. You answered quite rightly. Do I have a minute left? Yes. So now I'd like to talk about services in French. Our government had to establish a moratorium last year to keep 187 bureau offices throughout Canada, but this was based on criteria that was established that was looking at percentages and data. But now we're looking at the community as a whole, and we've talked about the importance of education. What have you learned to date? Where are we right now in terms of these consultations? We submitted a special report to Parliament about Part 4. we announced some key principles, but the main reason why we have to make these changes is because we've had major demographic shifts throughout the country. Sometimes we didn't have offices in the right places, and this was very complex. It's really hard to figure out who has the right to have services in French, where and when. When someone travels by plane in Canada, they leave from one airport, they'll have a right for service in French, and another airport they wouldn't. So all this is unclear. It's very complex. Also, the calculation, the mathematic calculation is something that worries me a bit. It's not the only way we can measure the vitality of a community. Sometimes we need vectors of vitality. Are there schools? Are there school boards? In some regions, there's a whole community around the school. So we have to have a much more simple system, and it has to lead to greater accessibility. And we have to recognize that not all the communities are the same. Sometimes we need special measures to make sure that there is access to services in French. So we're waiting to see the results of your work, and we're going to react in terms of the report we submitted to Parliament.
Thank you, Daryl. Mona Fortier, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Commissioner, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's new for me to be sitting here around this table, but it's not new for me to be participating in the development of official language minority groups. So it's a real pleasure for me to have this opportunity to ask you questions. Over the past, the Act's been in force for 50 years, and it needs to be modernized. And I believe the Prime Minister was very clear on this when on June 7th in the House of Commons, he said during question period that there would be a modernization of the Act. The Senate has looked into this. We are too. As Commissioner, we saw your priorities. How do you foresee the next year? What will you be doing with respect to the modernization of the Act? We've already begun thinking about this for the past year. In 2017, we held meetings, informal meetings with stakeholders. In April of 2018, we held about 50 consultations with over 300 people to talk about the modernization, to look at their priorities. We also have an online survey, and over 400 people have already responded to it, giving us their thoughts on modernization. All of the provinces and territories are going to participate. 50% of the respondents were Francophone, 40% Anglophones. So we then analyzed all of the briefs that were submitted to the Senate committee during their study on the Act. As I said this morning, we have principles, and I think it's important to remember that when the government proceeds with the modernization of the Act, the Commissioner has the Office of the Commissioner has 50 years of experience. We know what works and what doesn't. And the principles are quite broad, but they do enable us to focus on the important aspects of the Act. And it's important to understand what improvements need to be made. We would like a very broad modernization. It's not about definitions, whether it be about governance or compliance or regulations for Party 7 Part 7 or about use of French in the workplace. You know, it's very important to delve into all of this. If we respect the work language at work, we can provide better services. And the government is going to proceed with this. Do you have any recommendations to the government? Because various activities are being undertaken, and our committee, too, is going to be looking at this issue. What do we need to do to modernize the Act? Do you have any recommendations for us? I will be discussing this with Madame Joly this week. We have to understand that a lot of work has already been done. And do we want to repeat everything that's already been done? I think that people will be coming and testifying before the committee, but I do think that a lot of work has already been done. Thank you. I'd like to go back to your first annual report. And Ms. Seckley, thank you very much for the transition work that you did for us. We know that this was a joint effort. But I'd like to focus on immigration. And I'd like to ask you about the language tests that immigrants have to take. We know that it costs more to administer the French tests than the English tests. How can we deal with this issue? As far as I know, IRCC is looking into this issue of language testing. The department is looking at finding various suppliers so they can hold the tests. We know that that's quite a big obstacle for immigrants. The cost of testing is quite high. So in our immigration action plan, this is part of the immigration action plan. Do you believe that with this new official languages action plan that we're on the right track when it comes to immigration? I'm pleased to see that there is a comprehensive FPT plan. However, there are a lot of challenges that we have to deal with, but positive steps have been taken over the past few years. Thank you very much, Mona. We'll now turn to Sylvie Boucher. Good morning, Mr. Commissioner, and good morning to everyone accompanying him. It's the first time you've appeared here. I've been sitting on this Official Languages Committee for several years now, and the same questions keep cropping up. I don't know you very well. And many organizations have told us that the commissioner is their watchdog and that the commissioner needs to have some teeth. I'd like to hear what you have to say about your 3 priorities. The second priority is to work with federal institutions and partners. Could you tell us, when you intervene, when it's time to have some teeth, to stand up on behalf of official language minority communities, are you prepared? What are you prepared to do for them and us? And when the need arises, are you going to be able to be their real watchdog and intervene with the federal departments? We know that some institutions are quite hesitant to comply with the official language requirements. Right now, we're limited in terms of what type of action we can take. We can investigate, we can ensure that recommendations have been implemented. But if I take an example of a federal institution that is reluctant to comply, that would be Air Canada. We're all very familiar with this issue. This is an example where the commissioner doesn't have the means necessarily to bring about significant change. For the past 50 years, we have been conducting investigations and doing follow-up. And what we've noted and what we have to wonder is, has that really had any bearing on the conduct of these institutions? Do we have the tools we need to change the behavior of these institutions, whether it be Air Canada, whether it be the port authorities? We have to wonder whether they have changed their conduct. Some federal institutions really comply with all of the requirements, but some of them don't. And when we talk about Air Canada, perhaps the Act needs to have some mechanism that apply to all institutions. But are you going to be able to have any teeth? I'm asking you, are you able to stand up tall to really protect official language minority groups and really be their watchdog? That's part of my mandate. And this is very important to me. All that we do is designed to help these communities. The issue of communications and services to the public, Part 7, justice. This is all in an effort to develop our communities. Why? At one point, we're going to have to decide as a society whether the duality really needs better tools to better do its job. Do I still have some time remaining? I'll ask my question another way. You have spoken, that's well and good. We have agreements. But what we've heard from a lot of organizations, the ones we've met with, I must say, Mr. Commissioner, this committee is not partisan. We're all working to further linguistic duality. We don't have political colors here. But what we heard is that you don't want to make waves. Mr. Théberge, I'm asking you today, are you going to really stand up, make waves, if the language minorities need you to make waves? My answer to you is yes. I intend to speak more often when events occur in this country that perhaps go beyond the scope of my mandate, but which have an impact on our official language communities. Vigilance is necessary given what's happened recently. And what we've acquired to date can easily be lost. Because, thank you, and the vitality of official languages depends on how we're able, on our ability to stand up and shout loud and clear about what we hold dear to us. Thank you. Jean Rioux. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome. I'm pleased to meet with you. I'm a new member of this committee, and I'm accompanied by people who have a great deal of knowledge about this issue. I can tell you that there are perhaps I have, in my writing, I have the military base where there are a lot of recruits, and so we have a good reflection of what Canada's all about in my writing. 2 weeks ago, we went to the Canadian West. We went to the Yukon, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. And something really troubled me. I look at Object B of the Act to support enhance the vitality of English and French linguist minority communities. That's part of the Act. And I heard about a statistic in Vancouver, 4 to 5 children cannot go to early childhood centers in French. Is that something that we could focus on when we modernize the Act? Is this something that's doable? Because if we don't deal with this immediately, if these young people can't enter the Francophone system, we'll lose them. We can talk about getting Francophone immigrants all we want, but if we lose our very base, and this will have an impact on whether immigrants want to come and go to these French schools. Yes, we have to ensure that we have the infrastructure to welcome these children in the French-speaking daycare centers. An agreement was recently signed between the federal government and the provinces to create early childhood centers. Is there enough money to meet the demand? That's another question. I think that early childhood is part and parcel of the educational system, and this goes right up to the secondary level. I don't know if we can focus on these things in the Act, but when we do talk about positive measures, that is one aspect that we could deal with. People need to have access to early childhood education for their children in French. So what you're saying is that this issue isn't part of the Official Languages Act. We have to look at the FPT agreements when it comes to education. But what I heard is that the funds were not necessarily earmarked for education, that there was a lack of accountability, and there was no way of ensuring that the money was being spent properly. Are you going to be able to ensure that the minorities receive the funding that has been earmarked for them? The action plan talks about transparency and accountability. We want to ensure that the money goes to the right place, and we're going to analyze to what extent the agreements that we've signed with all of this accountability, we're going to see how this pans out. Some matters are before the courts because apparently some provinces have sent them funding to other types of programs. But we need strong language clauses. Another aspect that people raised is that in order for people to want to maintain their Francophone culture, they have to have a well-developed cultural milieu. The OLA does talk about the development of the Francophone community and Anglophone community as well. When we're talking about developing the communities and linking this to the Act, you would find this in Part 7. One thing is clear. The community is very attached to culture. Culture reflects who the community is. In minority communities, sometimes it's difficult to have cultural infrastructure. That's why it's important to have school boards that have a cultural component to it. We have to bring Francophones together in a Francophone space. And when we look at the positive measures set forward in Part 7 for the vitality and development of community, this all comes under that. Thank you. Thank you, Jean, for your intervention. We're going to suspend for a 10-minute break, and we will resume after.
Nous reprenons.
We're resuming now. And we're going to hear from Mr. Genouillot now. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Théberge, and all your colleagues for being with us here this morning. Mr. Théberge, you have been in your position now for a year, almost. So how's your new position going? It's passionate work. It gives me great satisfaction, given where I'm from, my experience, and everything I've lived. So this is a wonderful opportunity for me to work in a field that has an impact across Canada. Linguistic duality is one of the fundamental values of our country. We can show that we're open to others. And defending this fundamental value is a privilege for me. That's why I'm happy with my position. It's also a privilege for us to be here as elected officials of the population. Mr. Theberge, I just want to follow up with what Ms. Boucher asked you about the teeth that you would like to have in coming years as a commissioner. You talked about tools, but you didn't say what they were. Tools that you could have. If I remember correctly, we've already talked about various things that could be included in the Act when we modernize it, including coercive measures. Do you think coercion should be included, and if yes, so why? And what measures could we apply in different contexts? If we look at the special report on Air Canada, in this context, we mentioned some measures that could be useful to the Commissioner in terms of making Air Canada comply. It's not just Air Canada, it's also other federal institutions that could use a few tools when we follow up on our investigations. When I started in my position, there were interviews for 2 weeks, and then I was in my position. And we asked me a lot about administrative sanctions and fines. And I realized that it's important for the law to have some teeth. And we have to find mechanisms to give it teeth. There are two that come up often. First, binding agreements, and second, administrative penalties, monetary penalties, AMPs. This is new for an official languages commissioner and also for other agents of parliament to have access to such compliance mechanisms. There are administrative courts. They could also make it easier for complainants. But this issue will be up to parliamentarians. What powers are we going to give the commissioner? If we want to change people's behavior, as I said earlier, did behaviors change over the past 50 years? In some cases, yes, in others, no. So we want to change behaviors. We need things to encourage people to change their behavior. And so there are some tools that could help us change these behaviors. Should these necessarily be coercive measures, things to encourage people? Do you believe fundamentally, according to your values, that to change people's behaviors or an organization's behavior, well, we know that organizations include peoples or group of individuals, so do we not necessarily need coercive measures, fines, penalties, in your opinion? It's perhaps always preferable to achieve compliance that is focused on dialogue and agreements. Binding agreements don't necessarily have to be coercive. This is an agreement between two parties with a timeline and with some conditions, but it's still an agreement. In terms of AMPs, penalties, when we create an environmental fund to support the environment, we could do the same thing in this case as well with these penalties. We could have a linguistic fund to promote linguistic duality. One of the approaches that I will use this year at the federal level is to meet with people one-on-one. I'll meet with the key leaders, every deputy minister, regardless of their title. I'll meet with them one-to-one basis to get them to commit to official languages. That's another approach. But on some files, public travel, there are a lot of stakeholders involved. Perhaps we could just have a discussion and solve the problem, because this problem extends well beyond the law as it is right now. Thank you, Mr. Choquette. Thank you, Chair. Thank you once again, all of you, for being here today. I'm going back to the famous letter from the QCGN As I said, these two groups said that they were worried because they weren't consulted. How come you didn't consult them? And what would you do next time? What would you change differently? What would you change to make sure you've consulted them properly? As an ombudsman, I'm independent and I control how I operate things. I operate on a case-by-case basis. And if we have a ruling in front of us, we took some actions. And it's important for the commissioner to maintain his or her independence. I understand you're independent, but you also serve the population like me as an MP. So when you make a decision, it's important to consult stakeholders. I think the FFCB and the QCGM represent a lot of official language communities throughout the country, so they should be consulted so that you can shed further light on this question. And the crisis right now with these two organizations, in terms of your new approach and Part 7, well, I understand you're interpreting the Gascon ruling now, but your approach to complaints could be different. Some stakeholders said, and I go back to the Netflix complaint, as I said earlier, I'm one of the 4 plaintiffs in this case. And what I see, because you've talked about the powers of the Commissioner's office, but could we not have access to the secret agreement? And people saying no. When we asked you for access to the discussions that took place on Investment Canada, no, we were told it was secret. So then you arrived at a conclusion. And I'm wondering, if you didn't have access to any of these documents, I think it would be hard for you to arrive at a proper conclusion, particularly given your role. Your role is, yes, to say that the Gascon ruling is here now, but it's not what we want ideally. What we would like ideally, well, I don't have that, but here's the conclusion I can give. I believe you need to consult with politicians and Ms. Joly and also stakeholders to look at how you review complaints. I'm not sure if that's something you'll do. I'll repeat what I said before. I operate on a case-by-case basis, and I'll look how I operate going forward. But I'd like to clarify one thing. True, we did not have access to some information, but this was not essential in showing that the complaint was not founded. Because of the Gascon ruling, we cannot show, and Heritage didn't do their job either. There's a lack of coherence. Who was this $25 million for? Was it for Quebec? Was it for OLMCs outside of Quebec? So this didn't really make sense. But we couldn't show clearly that this agreement had a negative impact on communities at that time. And that's the sticking point here with the Gascon ruling. It doesn't mean that later there won't be one. And if there are negative impacts in the future, then we can lodge a complaint once again. But the legislation is very binding. The law, sorry. You said at the end of your report, in the current case, since there's no procedures, and you talked about Canadian Heritage, since there's no procedure or specific mechanism to take account of Part 7, when they look at investment possibilities in cultural aspects such as Netflix, we can't proactively evaluate potential negative impacts on the status of French and English and the negative impacts on OLMCs. So that's your conclusion at the end. In some articles in the press, Heritage Canada rapped you on the knuckles a little bit, even though they said you weren't necessarily at fault. When we did our investigation, we realized there was no mechanism in place or policy or procedure to evaluate the impact of such decisions. And we would really like to look at this question now and start developing the necessary tools to be able to evaluate impact on communities. Thank you very much, Francois. Now we're going to move to Alupa Clark. Chair, Commissioner, we've heard people say that the linguistic component of the legal challenge section has been called into question since last March. Did you hear that? We were happy before that we had this legal challenge component, but we're still waiting for more details. No announcements have been made. The expert committee hasn't been established to do the analysis of the requests. And this is an unacceptable delay. Many people have been waiting to access the legal challenge program, and for reasons I'm unaware of, we're still waiting for the appointment of the members of this expert committee. Thank you very much for your answer. The compliance measures. I'm happy to see how your opinion has changed in this respect, but would you like to have coercive measures for you or to an administrative tribunal if there are coercive measures in the OLA? Would you like them to be yours? I don't have... I'm still thinking about that. But one thing is clear. When we do make recommendations, we have to have measures to make sure that they're followed. Does it involve an administrative court, or do we need mechanisms that, like I mentioned earlier, in terms of powers for the Official Languages Commissioner? I'm not sure yet. I'm happy to hear you talk about the fact that for implementation of Part 4, there are some complementary aspects for the application. But we have to go beyond the figures and the math. We have to look at the number of schools, etc. And there's a consultation process within the Treasury Board, a public consultation process in place. But were you directly consulted? Did the department consult you and ask you to give ideas about this? Yes. We did submit proposals. Could you send the committee your submission? I don't believe it was written. I have other questions. We'll look at that later. Before it's tabled with the government in council, will you have a chance to look at the final decision? No. So I think it would be interesting for you to have a look at it, your say. Since we do have a say, we could even have a meeting together to see what it's in it. I'm quite serious. I think it would be a good idea. So moving along. Words are important. And I realize here that you're saying asking the government to do a meaningful modernization of the OLA. Do you not fear that this could be somewhat cosmetic if there is a modernization? Do you not fear that this could just be superficial in nature? What's meaningful modernization for you? Of course, we're always somewhat afraid when we want to modernize an act, because our expectations and those of the community may not be necessarily those of the government at this time. So when I talk about meaningful, we have to understand what the current shortfalls are in the Act And then we have to look at how this act can truly ensure the development and the future of OLMCs. And to do so, we have to make serious changes. And if we're talking about regulations or Part 7 of the Act or Part 4 and Part 7, this will also have an impact on how the federal apparatus functions. So this modernization has to involve true change. Thank you. Last question. The percentage of francophones in Canada, regardless of what you hear or say, is reducing. It was 20% 20 years ago. This is alarming because as founding people, this is fundamental. And this percentage continues to diminish. One day it may even disappear. I don't think so, but, well, now there's an agreement on immigration. We want a target of 4.4%, but this is theoretical. We need political leadership. If I was the Minister of Immigration, I would tell the officials next year it's 5% immigration, obligatory. It shouldn't just be theoretical. Did you participate in these discussions? We have to protect francophones in the country. It's very serious. I had a wonderful meeting with the minister and several members of his team. Yes, we're making efforts, but we're not achieving our targets. And until we do so, what you're saying in terms of the proportion of francophones in Canada will continue to decrease. The percentage is less important than the weighting. We have to keep up this influence, this weight. And that's why we're going to continue our discussions with immigration to make sure they're moving ahead with their action plan. We did make some progress in terms of express entry and francophone mobility. However, we haven't achieved our targets, and they're very aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here with us today. I, too, am new to this committee, and as you can hear and see, I bring a different perspective. So, for one, I would like to ask you about the report. In the report, you make mention to certain concerns raised by the QCGN and by English-speaking Quebecers that they don't necessarily, they aren't always able to find work in federal civil service. And we know that the percentage of Anglophone Quebecers is much higher than the percentage of Anglophone Quebecers working in federal service within Quebec. So there's clearly a disparity there, and I'd like to know what you can recommend, what changes you can recommend to make Part 6 of the Act clearer for stakeholders to understand.
Well, there is work which has been done with the Federal Council in Montreal in order to try to encourage greater participation of English-speaking Quebecers in the federal public service. That's on the table. I think there's also a lot of other issues around right now the English-speaking minority in Quebec that we have to look at. We had somebody working 1 day per week on a project to try to increase the participation rate of Anglophone speakers in the public service. It's a challenge, and our colleagues in the departments are aware of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, a lot of these offices, I would imagine, are in regions outside of Montreal as well, where there are fewer Anglophone Quebecers. But what are some ways that we can attract or that we can, I guess, promote these jobs for the Anglophone Quebecers? Well,
the strategy is always to try to attract locally. As you well know, on the North Shore and a few other places, attracting people from other areas could be a challenge. So it's important that the recruitment process happen within those communities, that we make sure that we have, that the the skill sets are available in those communities to do that, to carry out the work. It is one of the challenges, of course, in some of these remote areas is the fact that the population is declining. People are moving to larger centers, so we have to retain the people that are there.
Okay. As you know, our committee will be looking into the action plan and trying to make changes to it. Unfortunately, the aspects that we are going to be reviewing are basically in most of the control of the provincial government, I would say, when we look at early childhood, immigration, and justice. How can we ensure that these changes also improve the rights of and access to services of Anglophone Quebecers? As we know that the current provincial government, we're not exactly sure what direction they may take, but what are some protections that Anglophone Quebecers will have through this action plan?
Well, one of the things that's important to retain is that in the areas, for example, of health and education, even if they are of exclusive provincial jurisdiction, there are important federal contributions to those programs. So it is very important that we have the kinds of agreements we were talking about earlier about linguistic clauses to ensure that the English-speaking minority of Quebec gets access to their services, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's justice. And there are dollars in the new action plan which are new specifically for the English-speaking minority in Quebec.
Okay, and I guess my last question would be, even though you kind of answered it a little bit, I'd like for us to realize that at one point, the Federal Civil Service and the people who work in these federal agencies within Quebec are perhaps in some ways the problem as to why not more Anglophones are working in these areas. How can we make the act, hold people more accountable to actually following the rules and following what's said in the act? As my colleague mentioned before, official minorities need a watchdog, and you act as that watchdog. So what would you be able to recommend to make it better for minorities?
It would I think, Section 5 of the Act, which deals with language of work, we have to better define the obligations in that Act and make sure that they're enforceable.
Okay, thank you.
Merci, Manuela. Merci, Manuela.
Thank you, Emmanuela. François Choquette. Already. I do not have any questions. Mr. Sanson. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I'd like to focus on the 50th anniversary that will be celebrated and the reports that have been issued over the past 10 years. The former commissioner issued reports. I think it would be good to focus on the objectives that had been set by the commissioner as to what he felt needed to be done. Has progress been achieved? And if not, what could we do to remedy the situation? What type of follow-up could we be doing? I would imagine that you've already started looking at all of this, but I'm eager to hear your vision and how do you intend to focus on the key issues for this 50th anniversary that you will soon be celebrating. As you said, next year it's the 50th anniversary of the Official Languages Act. I was there when the Act was promulgated, and we've gone through a lot of change over the past 50 years. In the report we're currently working on, we're looking at where progress has been achieved If we look at education, for instance, and justice, we can see that progress has been achieved. However, it's important that we look at the challenges that lie ahead. So this will be a document that acknowledges that progress has been achieved. But despite the progress, I think that we have a lot left to do compared to what we've achieved. When we talk about vitality vectors in our communities, that won't change. Whether we're talking about demographics, culture, or education, justice, these sectors provide the very foundation for our communities. And then there's the whole concept of linguistic duality for the general population. I think that this belongs to all Canadians. As I mentioned briefly earlier, we must never take it for granted. We mustn't take anything we've gained for granted. How do we ensure that we hold on to this? How do we ensure that we're not simply not moving ahead, simply treading water? What do we need to do over the next 50 years? We have to really take a look at the position that held by the OLA. I would imagine that you're going to take risks. You're going to talk about areas where we haven't achieved any progress. Yes, you're right. And the way we judge progress depends on who you are. Some institutions have made in some areas there have been a lot of progress, in others not. Early childhood education, for instance. The document is going to give a portrait of the situation and explain where we need to go and what the challenges are. Perhaps we need an education summit. In the first summit, education summit, you can give the foundation, and then you can look at where you need to do. When will we get this report? May 2019. Earlier this time than in the past. Thank you, Daryl. Mona. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I come from the National Capital Region. I am the member for Ottawa-Vanier, and I have followed the Ontario government's position in its stance towards Ottawa, the capital, and its bilingualism. Do you think that there's a way to strengthen the OLA and in the way that it deals with the National Capital Region and its bilingualism? The City of Ottawa is a very strong symbol. It's a very powerful symbol for all Canadians. It's the national capital. It's a city that needs to reflect the linguistic duality of the country, in my opinion. The provincial legislation states that the City of Ottawa needs to provide services in French, so I hope that my colleague François will look into that matter. But in the preamble of the law, there is mention made of the City of Ottawa, so there's nothing new there. We talk about the importance of the city. And what surprises me is that the City of Ottawa has not embraced this linguistic duality. And the city has been given funding to further official languages, but nothing's been done. So the question I ask myself is, we have funding on the money to support the development of French services in the city of Ottawa, but they don't use this money. So mention is made of this in the preamble. Canadian Heritage provides money for this, as does the province of Ontario. I thank you. I would imagine that over the next year, you're going to be looking at ways to strengthen not only the preamble, but certain parts of the Act so that you focus on the City of Ottawa and its association with the Official Languages Act. I'd like to go back to immigration because this is a file that we've all been working on now for years. We know that the previous government had wanted to reach a rate of 4.4%. We're working on 5%. We're trying to find measures that will allow us to achieve this goal. The Official Languages Action Plan talks a lot of money for this that should help us achieve this goal or this target. Do you have an approach to identify what positive measures, because we've been talking about positive measure for some quite time now, how can we achieve this success in the area of immigration? In talking about immigration, the simple measure is the number of Francophone immigrants that settle in the country. The action plan on immigration is proposing a pre-departure proposal, a proposal that would cover pre-departure right up to settlement. We also have to look at the way we welcome immigrants here in Canada. I've visited various regions, and I can tell you that the way we welcome immigrants varies from one place to the next. So, and attracting people to one region is one thing, but keeping them there is something else. All regions benefit from having French immigration, whether it be in Winnipeg or in Acadie. It's important that we attract immigrants there. So we have to make the community welcome these immigrants, aware of how important this is. Numbers, that's one thing. But when you go to the large urban centers, well, when immigrants go to large centers, it's to the detriment of the smaller towns and villages. Language training in French also is problematic. Thank you. That's all I have. Mr. Généreux. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to the modernization of the Act. On page 11, you said that the federal government will be reviewing the regulations on official languages. And you also talk about various discussions and preliminary consultations that have taken place. Discussions, consultations, consulting experts, and then there'll be a report. And this government has made it its priority to conduct all kinds of consultations. But what about taking action? With the Court Challenges program, well, it was announced that it would be reinstated a year and a half ago. Nothing's happened. In 2019, yes, it will be the 50th anniversary, but maybe the report won't, or the modernization of the Act won't have taken place. So how do you see the state of things right now? Do you have any time frame for the modernization of the Act? It's up to the government to set the time frame, but given all the work that's been done to date, and given that the Senate committee will be tabling its report in May, I believe, we will have concluded our work. and we will have come to a very firm position. So I think the FFCA and the QCGN has done work, so I don't think we need another broad consultation. I'm cautiously optimistic. The Official Languages Committee has not officially begun its study of the renewal of the Act. Do you think that the Official Languages Committee should be part and parcel of this review process? The committee has an extremely important role to play in this modernization process. You are the committee able to communicate with your colleagues. You have a crucial role to play in the modernization process. But aside from communication, do you not think that we should also be an integral part of the whole analysis process? Yes, absolutely. Earlier, in your opening statement, you talked about new technology, which leads me to think about this aspect. With the time it'll take to implement this new law, technology will have been furthered as well. And one of the aspects that is that's so important is artificial intelligence. And I'd like you to note that when you make recommendations, whether it be recommendations for the regulations or the Act itself, I'd like you to consider artificial intelligence. 2 years ago, we talked about translation problems, and we talked about interpretation. Some MPs used Google Translate, but I don't know if you remember that, Madame, but we have to ensure that technologies are perform well so that they actually reflect the image that Canada wants to convey when it comes to official languages. I've had a few meetings with people regarding translation and artificial intelligence. We're at the point we have reached a certain level of quality, but in my opinion, not adequate enough to ensure that there's equal quality for both versions. Technology provides us with opportunities for offering services. For example, bilingual websites, they work very well. We can fill out forms online now, but the Google Translate does lead to confusion at times. Not only confusion, but it's clear that English and French are not given equal treatment. The Act has to be dynamic. It has to be able to evolve in keeping with technology. But unfortunately, as a society, I have the feeling that we're always going to be lagging a little bit behind technology.
Thank you. François Choquette, you have 3 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I talked a lot about Netflix today, but I'd also like to talk about media in minority settings. So let's talk about media. And they've went through a serious crisis, and it still is a serious crisis, because a plan was announced, and there was some criticism of this plan. Namely, there was an editorial from Sophie Gaulin, who is the director of La Liberté. And she says, who does Mélanie Joly think she is? And it says, that this kind of good news is given by Ms. Joly. It was given recently. And on October 4th, the minister decided to give the journalists her good news, saying that they would help the local press. She says there's nothing new in this, no real new actions that are being taken in this. 4.5 million over 5 years, 4.7 rather. So I'm going back to what Mr. Genereux was saying about technology that's being developed. And this creates new challenges in terms of the Official Languages Act. Of course, we want to modernize it, but how do you see things? What are the challenges that we have to overcome for files such as Netflix and files such as newspapers and media in minority settings? They have a lot of challenges in terms of advertising. They used to have more advertising spent from the government, and now they have less. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about this issue. The whole question of media and minority settings obviously is related to technology, as we were saying earlier. La Presse, the paper, wasn't able to keep up to changes because of the change in advertising. I heard one of the editors say that Google will be looking at 1.3 billion in ad spending that usually used to go to traditional media. So for minority media outlets that are very small, well, there used to be La Liberté, the Patriote paper, but now there has been a media shift, a digital shift. Do they have enough in place to survive? And in the action plan, there are two components. There is 4.5 million for internships, and what media really needs are operating funds. Well, it's good to have interns that are trained in-house. There aren't a lot of them, of course. But the second component, which is $10 million, which is also on the table, I don't think it's clear what this money will be for. There's a crisis right now with Francophone media or Anglophone media in minority settings. It's a difficult model to maintain, particularly given the conditions in advertisement. Thank you very much, Francois and Commissioner, and to members of your team for your splendid presentation and your very direct answers to the questions asked by committee members. So thank you. This was a great success. Thank you so much for shedding light on our questions. Now we're going to suspend for a few minutes and we're going to continue our meeting in camera for some committee business. So all those who cannot be here in camera, please exit the room during these 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.